it's Jack from Cultaholic.com back again with a late Friday news update. Check out Tom's video earlier today for more news, but right now, let's get into those headlines. First of all, we take a look at original plans for the AEW TNT Championship, and they're quite different from what happened. Next up, WWE are said to be impressed with a Raw superstar in recent times. And finally, we have another update on WrestleMania 37. First of all, let's go to Brodie Lee, who recently appeared on the AEW Unrestricted podcast and talked basically about how he doesn't think the original plan was for him to win the TNT Championship at all. Brodie said this, he said, "I believe that the original plan was for me to not become TNT champion. I don't know much, I'm not privy into the ins and outs, the nuts and bolts of it all, probably because I don't want to be, because if I have a thought in my head, I'll quickly become married to it, and then if something changes, I go insane." He goes on to say, "I try not to know too much, and I kind of just live in the moment. When I live for the moment. I learned my lesson the hard way over many, many years, so I try to stay level-headed and not get too much information and receive things that are presented to me." He finishes by saying, "The match itself was presented to me like a week or two before it even happened, so I just wanted to train and look the part and do whatever is asked of me." So yeah, from that, we can kind of tell that Brodie thinks, although he's not 100% certain, but he thinks that the original plan was never for him to hold the TNT title at all. Of course, he won it from Cody in that really shockingly quick squash match. But he seems to think the plans changed and he was presented with the idea only a week or two before the actual match itself. Now, this lends credence to a lot of theories floating about out there, which are that Cody only dropped the belt because he needed to go away for a few weeks to film his show, and now that he's back, he's won the belt right back. And this led to a lot of ill feeling actually online, despite it being a really good match, that dog collar match, the rematch between the two, which Cody of course won and won the belt back. A lot of people were saying, oh, of course, he's gone away to film his show and now he's back, he's just won the belt straight back. But you've got to kind of say that this new information portrays it in a little bit of a better light, because Brodie, I mean, may never have won the belt anyway, so at least it gave him a bit of a boost because he beat Cody in such decisive fashion. But Cody is, of course, once again the TNT champion, now a two-time holder of that belt, and he will defend it next week on the AEW Dynamite Anniversary show against Orange Cassidy. Next up, let's go to Inside the Ropes, who are talking about WWE apparently being impressed with a certain Raw superstar and their recent in-ring work, and it's none other than Zelina Vega. Inside the Ropes say that sources have told them that WWE regards her manager role on TV as really special, and that's why they always found something for her to do. But apparently she's also regarded as one of the best talkers in the entire company, regardless of gender, and that Vince McMahon is apparently a personal fan of hers. Now, of course, Vega has recently had a couple of matches against Asuka, noteworthy for the fact that Vega rarely has matches in WWE. She's often been a manager up until this point, but has recently started to step into the ring on a more regular basis, and apparently has impressed backstage. She's actually only had 5 singles matches, according to Inside the Ropes, on TV since debuting on the main roster back in April 2018. And as well as that, she obviously appeared in, I think, 1 Royal Rumble, maybe 2. Maybe just 1, no, 2, I'll say 2. But WWE is said to have been very impressed with her recent in-ring work, especially that against Asuka, which is of course very promising for Zelina Vega. It's nice to see her be given more of a chance to show what she can do inside the ring, as well as in her managerial role at ringside, which of course, Inside the Ropes have rightly pointed out there, she absolutely excels at. And it'll be interesting to see what happens to her going forwards, because Andrade appears to have ditched both Zelina Vega and Angel Garza. Will she stick with Garza? Will both just split off and go their separate ways and strike out on their own? I guess it remains to be seen, but apparently, whichever happens, whether she's more of a manager going forwards or more of a wrestler, it seems like WWE are pretty enthusiastic about Zelina's chances of succeeding. Now let's head to Wrestling Observer Radio, where they were talking about Finn Balor's recent injury. Of course, Balor is reported to have sustained an injury, a jaw, possibly a broken jaw, in his title defense against Kyle O'Reilly, a match which Balor actually did win, but was then reportedly taken to hospital afterwards. Well, on Wrestling Observer Radio, they've basically said that it was made to be worse than it is. So the injury, apparently, the reports of the injury are not inaccurate, but apparently it has been exaggerated a bit how bad, how devastating an injury it could have been. There's still no word, of course, on how long Balor will be out for. However, the typical recovery time for a broken jaw is said to be around 6 weeks. Now, obviously, first and foremost, we'd like to wish Balor a quick and speedy recovery. Hopefully this is true. Hopefully WWE have exaggerated the injury for dramatic reasons so that, of course, he can recover quicker and he's in less trouble. But there's no way of really telling how true that is. I suppose we'll just have to wait and see how quickly Balor can return to action. As we mentioned there, a broken jaw typically apparently takes about 6 weeks to recover from, although I'm assuming that can vary depending on the severity of the break and maybe the place that it broke in. But hopefully he's back in no time, especially because, of course, he is the NXT champion, and that brand's going to want their champion to make appearances, aren't they, to hold up the brand. However, there are a lot of main eventers in NXT who can kind of tide things over, I guess, in the main event scene, people like Adam Cole and more recently Kyle O'Reilly, until Balor gets back to action. But yes, hopefully Finn's alright. It was a wonderful match, of course, that TakeOver 31 main event between Balor and O'Reilly. There were some reports suggesting that the match may have been cut short sooner because of Balor's injury. People were saying the finish was a little bit abrupt. It was a bit of an abrupt finish in my opinion, but I also think that it worked in the context of the match. It was already a brutal and hard-hitting match. Both men were selling a lot for each other, and it could realistically have ended at any moment. And it didn't seem especially abrupt. It just seemed a little bit abrupt, I think, given the context of how matches usually pan out in main events on NXT. Next up, another update on WrestleMania 37. We recently reported, and various different sites reported, we were just kind of reporting what they reported, it wasn't our story to break, that apparently Governor Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, has basically given the go-ahead for stadium shows to happen once again in the state. Controversial decision, given the nature of what's going on in the world right now, but apparently this was music to the ears, according to WrestleVotes, I believe, on Twitter, music to the ears of Vince McMahon, of course, who's going to want to pack everyone in and make as much money as he can. Well, a little bit of a follow-up on that, according to Dave Meltzer in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, who says, while it's not officially announced, the plan is for WrestleMania to be on March 28th, 2021 at Raymond James Stadium, which is of course in Tampa, Florida, and then go to Los Angeles for 2022. Now, the original plan, of course, was for LA to be the destination for WrestleMania 37, the one coming up next year, but that seems to be a plan that's going to be pushed back until the following year. Of course, this year's WrestleMania was supposed to be in Tampa, and now it seems like everything's been shifted 1 year into the future, if that makes sense, because of course this year's WrestleMania took place in front of no crowd at the Performance Center. I think the big update here is, well, two things: the venue and the date, of course. The venue being Raymond James Stadium. I wonder how many people there's going to be. I wonder if they'll run a full capacity show or whether it'll be limited capacity, like what wrestling shows, what WWE and AEW have been doing recently, and New Japan, of course, places around the world. Or will it, just be a full capacity show? And if so, what state will the world be in then? How controversial a decision could that prove to be? The other talking point there from that development is the date. There was uncertainty over whether the date would change or not. Apparently, it seems like the date isn't going to change, and it's still scheduled for March 28th. It's really bizarre, isn't it? There's really no telling what WrestleMania is going to look like next year, but it certainly seems like it's going to take place in Tampa, Florida. And I just really hope that by that point, everything's going a little bit better maybe, and hopefully it's a bit more of a spectacle, while of course maintaining safety as a priority. And finally, just a bit of an update on the goings-on in New Japan Pro Wrestling, because of course there's been a change in management. The ex-president now, Harold May, has left, and now the new president, Takami Obari, has stepped in. But according to Meltzer, this is another report from the Wrestling Observer newsletter, it's been a bit of a frosty reception for Obari. Obari is currently in the phase of, apparently he's been groomed for leadership, he's in the phase of being brought in charge, but if those inside the company apparently don't know if that'll really be the case, or just his public position, and I guess other people will be in control within the company, but none of that is certain yet. Apparently many within the company were happy that Harold May was leaving. We recently heard that apparently he'd, according to one AEW star had said, so presumably one who'd been in New Japan previously, said that, Harold May had alienated a lot of the English-speaking locker room over there for whatever reason, maybe with his unwillingness to work with AEW, I suppose, and also apparently a lot of people in New Japan were quite happy that Harold May was leaving. But apparently, according to Meltzer, the New Japan fans were generally unhappy. I'm guessing that means the ones in Japan, because apparently they had quite a good relationship with Harold May. He had quite a positive public-facing persona, I suppose, according to this report. So apparently the office was mixed. The New Japan office had a mixed response to it. The locker room were generally happy, and the fans were unhappy about May leaving. But it seems like apparently Obari, the new president, or the incoming president, is not being welcomed as much as a new leader privately by many. Meltzer goes on to point out that New Japan presidents and CEOs have been newcomers to the business recently because they've been chosen by Bushiroad, and they often have a hard time gaining the trust and the respect of the employees and the wrestlers because they're not wrestling, they're not industry people. He goes on to explain that a little bit, saying the wrestling people don't want to be told what to do and what not to do by who they consider amateurs when it comes to the wrestling industry, and this has apparently hurt morale to some extent since 2018. So very interesting stuff there for New Japan, and interesting news, of course, across the board. Thank you very much for watching this video. I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com. Leave your thoughts and opinions in that comment section down below. Stay safe out there, of course, stay positive, and I'll see you very soon.